How's everybody doing? Give folks another minute or two. Yeah. Getting holiday overwhelmed yet? Like me? I'm not even doing anything these holidays and I'm overwhelmed by them.
I'm trying to ignore them.
Yeah. I'm
Yeah.
giving myself the gift of staying on the West Coast and doing nothing terribly holiday-ish whatsoever. I have ordered the official cheese that gets handed out in my family from Sugarbush Farms in Vermont. Best smoked cheddar ever. But that's about the extent of my preparations this year. All right, and I'm betting with holidays we're going to have small crowds. And one of the things that I will take on towards the end of the session, take an opinion poll on, is whether I do or don't hold the second Wednesday, third Wednesday, the second session of this in December or not, because that's going to be on the 21st. And so I don't know if people are going to be busy or not. I am not. I'm going to actually be able to be at home. So I'm happy to do it. I just don't know if people are going to be busy with other things. So I'm seeing, no, you're not going to be busy. No. Okay, Paula, I like the new haircut, by the way. So if there's a consensus amongst the people that show up most often, I will indeed show up on the 21st. Otherwise, I'll cancel it in favor of holiday stuff for people. But that is sort of where I am right now. I haven't decided either way. And there's always the video afterwards. Make sure I've got no notices coming in that I need to worry about. I think so. Okay, well, I have the board. I did some work on the board. I'm going to bring that over. It's been a while since I showed off the board because I didn't have it organized enough for chapter 4, but I'm starting to get my stuff together now that I don't have crazy shows. So let's look at where we have gone and where we are going. So for those of you that weren't here for the first couple chapters, what I started to do is as we worked on things, I would put out the settings because I'm trying to make sort of like, I don't know if any of you are of the right age or mindset to have done samplers when you were learning embroidery, but when I was doing samplers as a kid, I always wanted to have all the stitches. So this is my goal, is I'm going to try and have all the stitches available that are in the books, chapters in the various sections. You can see it's going to be one of those kind of talking days. And we sort of then went back and started setting them. So only some of these are set because I sort of did one of each style basically. And there's a couple that I need to redo, like my beloved triangle, which I just need to find some more triangular stones because this one chipped as I was setting. And I still owe a redo of the emerald cut step bezel. So I'm not over far enough. There we go. Yeah. So the emerald cut. I can't figure out for the life of me what my third Marquis was. So I may have used it in another project already. And then we went into the weird shape bezels and modifying things with prongs. And then we did various tube settings and then started on the funky ways that you can either double set or set bullets and tongues of various sorts. And then conicals, some of which I've set. This one I'm probably going to have to redo because I think I left it just a smidge too small for the project. Then some setting from behind, and I think I have another reverse setting that I've got tucked away somewhere. I tucked in some of the other variations that we do. This was a prong and bezel combination, similar to the hybrid prong and bezel that was earlier on. These are some of the examples of things that you can do to modify them. And this is the thing that I teach in the class that I did, Bezels with Ordinary. Then we're heading into chapter 4, and we're right now catching back up on the crown settings, but we've done variations on the prong settings, 4-prong, 3-prong, tiny ones. And this is just the example where I said when you're setting a stone by itself, you can solder on a back plate just to hold it if you need to. That's the one we're going to set today. So that's the combination sheet and wire setting. There's our cushion setting. I don't have a triangle. I got to get a triangle. I realized when I was looking through the book, I realized I'd missed that one. We're going to work on the emerald today. And I got a sneak peek for you of some of the things I've been practicing for later in this chapter, including my little rocket ship This is that tab setting. I mean, the cut tab, slotted tab, where it's made out of two sheets that you put together, card setting, I think he calls it, where you've slotted them together to create the framework for the setting. And these have all kinds of variations you can do. This one, I just happened to pick one of the stones that I had that I thought would be interesting. I'm going to do at least a traditional cab for that. And if people want to see the variation for a faceted stone, I'll do that as well. This is the framework for when we get into the setting. I guess these are just wire and tube settings, but you're going to do batches of them at a time. So I've been playing around with making my templates for that. And then after we get through the slotted card, that's what it's called, slotted card, cut card, and the multiples, then the last thing that we're going to do is make a prong setting by splitting square wire down the middle a couple directions, and then shaping it from there. So we've done a whole lot. This is we're almost at the 1 year mark on this project. And I've got a few settings awaiting settings still. So this isn't a full list, but it's well on its way. There's a lot fewer settings in each of the other chapters. But if there's anything on any of those that anyone wants to see up closer, let me know and I'll bring it over to the tiny cam, you know, the close-up cam. But it's a lot of work we've done along the way. So there's definitely a bunch that I want to redo. I know I'm going to be working on crown settings for a long time to come. And obviously I've got to fight and overcome my nemesis, the emerald setting. I'm trying to think what others I really want to practice more. I'm definitely going to be playing around with the slotted card because this is literally the first time I've ever successfully made one that didn't look like a monster when it was done. And I don't know, I think those are probably the biggies that I want to play around with. I think I'll probably redo that one just because I want to get it. I still don't use conicals in my work pretty much, so it's not terribly exciting to me. I'm finding setting it harder than I thought it would be. I don't know. Are there any others that you guys want to make sure that I repeat when I do a catch-up session down the road that you want more detail on, or that it was so mangled in the course of our first run at it that it needs a clearer pass? Okie doke. That's
There's
where we
so
are.
many.
Yeah, there's so many. It's lots of ways to set stones. I still fall back mostly on more traditional things, but this is definitely reminding me that it's not as scary to make prong settings as it seems like it is when you're on the other side of it. And that I should do more with precision and filing. And that's pretty good of a segue to what I've been practicing between rounds. Because I've not been happy with the cleanliness of my crown setting. You guys know from our past sessions that I always battle the imperfection of my measuring skills. And so I've been really, really struggling to make these crown settings. Let me see if I can get this not so glary. Hold on a sec. That's probably a little better. Because I was finding that I'm just like, I'm sloppy with it. This was one of my first ones and I really didn't care for it. I think that was the first one. Maybe I threw the first one away in frustration. But they look so elegant in John's drawings, and they look so elegant when they're handmade. I mean, when they're machine made and so precise. And what I realized was that what I'm fighting, in addition to making sure that I'm much slower and more meticulous about the actual marking out of where I'm going to cut, what I'm lacking is how do I start it cleanly? Because I can saw a straight line. Seriously, I can. I know how to saw a straight line. But trying to get a cut into a piece that is tapered while also at an angle to it so I don't cut the other side, while also trying to make sure they're all marked out and exactly the same, is doing me in. It really is. So this week I've been playing around with other ways to start my cuts, and I'm getting a lot more satisfaction out of this approach. So I wanted to talk a little bit about it. I am using one of the burrs that I came to late in life. I'm using barrel burrs, which if you haven't seen, and let me get a big one so that you guys can actually see it on screen. If you haven't gotten barrel burrs are just straight rods of material for drilling. And so what I realized is I can mark my initial quadrant out quite nicely, but as soon as I start to mark the in-betweens and then try to cut between them, I'm screwing it up. So I've been taking the one of the smaller barrel burrs, and I've been going right on my marked quadrants and digging in just enough to get started on each one. And then I move up to a larger barrel burr and get a little bit of a divot in. And then I decide how far I want to go, because at some point I have to switch over to using files to get the profile that I want. But that can be as straightforward as digging down enough that I can then use a round file, cutting across so that I'm getting equal filing on both sides. And the important thing to remember is, just like when we're doing, say, a fold line, a crease line or something, flip your piece so you're doing filing from both sides, because remember, a lot of our files have a taper. So file, 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 rotate 180, file, 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 and keep the consistent marks, and then aim for whatever line you've set for yourself as your bottom point. And then start working on the detailing. And that's where you get into the fun stuff with this. And this is what I personally have to do a lot more work on. I need to get more meticulous about the shape that I'm creating based on the angle of my file. And I think this is my consistent one. I wanted to show one that I did some variation on. I'm going to bring this one over to the close-up cam, because I want you to see how slight differences in file use can really make a difference. If I can get it close enough that you guys are going to be able to see the subtleties. Focus. There we go. Okay. So on half of these, all I used was the round file afterwards, and I'm angling it from the outside, or I'm flipping it this way to get a deeper cut.
Put it in the picture, Rachel.
Sorry. Am I in? How's that?
That's
Good. Okay. So I'm either filing this way to get a long slope, or I'm filing this way to get a slightly less steep slope, but it gets the curvature that I want in here. So I do a combo of those, and it gives me this soft curve that I get here. Or I started with a round and then switched to a triangle file and used the same action. I don't have the triangle file over here, but I used the same action to get more of a sort of a cleavage kind of thing. And we can take this further. I could take a saw and very carefully saw a not too deep line all the way down my crown, and then work the filing on the outside. I'd probably want to make sure I'm using a thicker gauge material if I was going to do that kind of decorative element. I could do square, there's any number of things. What I was not enjoying, which may also be part of the scale that I'm working at, because I'm working very large in a smaller setting, this might actually be quite elegant, but what I wasn't liking in my manually cut ones is the top profile. And I'm feeling a little better as I start to work this detail. I really like the soft rounded curve in particular. I think I need to work a little bit more on this, on the sharp steep one. And I'm going to draw those up on the whiteboard for you as well, so that you can see in greater detail what I'm actually talking about here. And then after I had done some of that cut in, then I went and started using my sandpaper discs to get a little bit more clean line detail on it. Go back to this guy. So just bringing in the sandpaper along each line like that, or taking it down and notching off the corners so that I got a smoother profile to each one of them. So those are the things that I've been working on this week in terms of getting neater in my overall presentation. But let me draw those two things. And I still got a long way to go on this particular setting. And I think I probably want to do some in smaller scale just to see what the difference is. So the two different displays that I was showing you there, one, they both started life with the barrel burr cutting away like that. Okay. And then the one version of it I took to be triangle, and that started pulling it down this way while still giving me a little bit of frontage. So it sort of creates this cut in. I'm doing a really bad job of this dimensional drawing. It creates a kind of a chevron sort of effect. Or the other is still on screen, where I started with the barrel again. And I took the round file and just deepened the front curvature. So it too starts to get a chevron, but it's sort of this angling up that happens along it. And you can take that as deeply as you want. You could use square files, you can use triangle files, you know, there's all kinds of things. I just find that I'm really liking the subtlety of this curve a little bit more than I like the sharpness of that. But again, it may look better in small scale. And I'm sure you guys can come up with a million variations on this. I do want to try some things where I further detail the rest of the crown setting so that what we end up with is something along the lines of that with a little cutaway between each segment. And then there'll be one over here somewhere, over here somewhere, right? So the exterior detailing doesn't have to cut all the way through. But again, a combination of saw blade and file will get you some neat variations. Which leads us to the thing that I had promised I was going to try on screen this time, which is the undercut that we're going to do. So I'm not going to have, let me start with our more basic version. So we have built one of these. It's as ugly on my drawing as it is in real life right now. We got the multiple these in here and our prongs. And we've got the basic crown, but what we're going to do now, and John describes it in the towards the end of this section, I'll get you the page number in a moment, is we're going to cut off the extra material very carefully to keep this little ring. And then we're going to add some detailing going the other way that cuts away some of the material underneath. And then we solder back on the piece that we've cut away. Okay. So one of the ones that I made last week that I've cleaned up a little bit, I left enough extra material. I think this is for my amethyst setting. Double check. Just my little sticky wax. So this is the amethyst. I've got a little bit more material than I need up at the top, but I'll trim that away when we go to the setting phase because we're going to have to cut in. Oops, now I look too dark. Hang on. Let me see if I can get this a little brighter. Oh, too bright. How's that? That looks pretty decent. Okay, so the stone is going to be a little further in. I had too much extra height on this one, but I've left myself enough material at the bottom that I can cut away. And so basically, I've marked that out. Basically, I've used my calipers to mark it out, and then I started by scoring it. I'm going to mark it in blue just so you guys can see it a little better. So I have a theoretically fairly even cut point along the base of it. And then once I've got it cut away, I can decide whether I'm going to take material away like this. You know, where do I want to take it from? Do I want to make the petals? I could do it here instead. I think in the way that I've set this one up, because it's a fairly deep cut, I'm going to do it in the petals themselves, in the prongs. And this is just a very careful cutting exercise with a fairly fine blade. I'm going to switch in a finer blade than this broken one I've got here. I'm going to go down. Oh, I do have 4s. I'm going to do a 4/0 just because I want to take this slow and steady so that I get a consistent line. Switch to my goggles so I can actually see you while I'm showing you what I'm doing. So I'm again starting with my score line. I'm going to do a little bit of cutting into the track that I've made and rotate the piece. Are you guys able to see this? I'm just rotating along. I'm rolling the piece and cutting a little bit and then a little bit further along. So I'm deepening the track just like I might with a file if I were making a fold line or something. But what I'm aiming to do is make sure I have a nice, consistently outlined layer before I actually cut all the way through. Because if I cut all the way through on an open bezel like this, it's guaranteed that it's going to be a really wonky, like one side tall and one side short. But if I keep rotating and cutting a little bit at a time, I can make a more even pass.
Carmen wants to know what page we're on.
Oh, we are, thank you. I said I was going to pull that up and get my glasses so that I can see. We're back at the beginning of chapter 4. We are on page 91. And at the bottom left, it says, if desired, the lower half of the setting can be handled decoratively as well. And he shows some pictures of the cutaway that we're doing. And this is part of what makes this a crown setting, is that it creates this little crown-like shape. A little more wax on. Finer saw blades, I find I always get gunked up a little faster. So again, just working my way around and around the piece, sawing a little bit at each pass. Eventually it'll come all the way through. But I don't have a whole lot of material to give away to the saw or to filing. So I want to make sure that I'm doing as neat a job as possible. Which still doesn't guarantee a perfect cut, but it makes it a little more likely. And then at some point, I've gone far enough through that I have to commit. Ooh, so not horrible, not the cleanest cut I've ever made in my life, but it's not horrible. And now I have to find the piece that popped off. So there's my little extra piece. Don't lose it. My little extra piece that needs a lot of cleanup. Both sides need some cleanup. But once I've got some filing done, I'm going to then resolder it. So next up is let's clean up the bigger piece of the two halves. Just going to grab the old filing and sanding plate and get a little water. And all I'm looking to do is get it level from that rough cut that I just did. basically just getting my saw blade marks off of it. And the neater you cut, the less you got to get rid of, obviously. All right, so there's that half. And then this is so tiny that I'm going to try the masking tape or painter's tape approach to holding it, which is to make a little grip for it. Just folding the tape and taping it down, and then that gives me a little more to hold on to while I'm cleaning up the rough edge on the cut side. Again, don't need to get rid of much, just enough to make it be a neat flat surface, because I'm going to be soldering it back to the other piece in a little bit. Okay, so I've now got my base ring that I cut off, and I've got the piece that it came from, right? And so those fit together nicely right now. I need to then put in my decorative elements, and I'm going to try showing you the using the barrel burr. And the other thing that I've gotten more used to doing is I'm using my circles template and finding the one that it just fits inside of to start my marks, but I got to actually tell myself which one I want to be the center point. So let's start with the one that goes opposite the seam, because John always wants us to take the seam mark and take away as much material as we can. So that's going to be 0.1. And then we can line the others up accordingly. That's mark 1, mark 2, 3, and 4. And those, if I've done my top neatly enough, those will be right and nice and centered. In this case, they're probably going to be a little skewed because this was one of the not as perfectly done ones as I wanted from last time. And I'm going to start with a fairly small barrel burr. These guys want to jump around. So if you're having a really, really hard time getting it to catch, one, you can try a slightly smaller size burr to start, or two, you could file a small notch in it. You just don't want to take too much away because you want to make the work be done by the burr more than anything else. Don't forget your wax. And then I'm picking one, and so this is going to be a little challenging for me because normally I would hold this quite close to me because of my own eyesight. So I'm going to try to get positioned in a way that you guys can see it and I don't screw it up. So I'm just going for the initial patch on my mark. Okay, and then I'm going to do the opposite side. And I find that with a barrel burr, you have to go at decent starting speed to get it to catch well. And it wants to jump a lot. So just be ready for it when it's heading towards your fingers. So I'm sort of starting on the corner, on the edge, on the lip, and then rotating it into place on my mark. And then once I've got the original marks in place, I might go down a little bit more. Yep, just like that. Hang on, guys. Managed to grab my finger with that one. Bleeding, not enough to matter. So let me bump up a size. Yeah, let me go put a Band-Aid on this, guys. Otherwise, I'm going to get silver dust in it. I'll be right back. I've never been one for the tape up your fingers with super glue if I have a Band-Aid at the ready. It's just a minor patch. Right, so with the barrel burrs, I'm gonna bump up a little bit, but I'm on the, especially on the lower side of things, I want to make sure that I'm not overdoing my cuts. There's the one I was just working on. Oops, did I drop it? Oh, there it is, hiding behind other things. So I'm just going to make sure that my base cuts are in there pretty firmly before I move up to the next side. And if I caught any of the upper lip, I may need to do some touch-up sanding. I did on that same thing that jumped over my finger. I jumped onto the wall of it, so I need to clean that up a little. Not much, just a bit of a scotch. All right, so I've now got my starting points to where I'm going to go filing further, or where I'm going to go using the burrs further. And the burrs are not something that John particularly mentions in here, I don't think. It's something that as I said, I was not happy with the neatness factor for me on the strictly hand file based version of it. And so I was looking for ways to upgrade my precision. And I'll be working on it for a while, but it's definitely better than it was.
Have you marked how,
Pardon?
have you marked how deep you're going to go?
I have not, because I'm going to first, you should if you want to have a consistent level, but I'm going to first just go based off of the other direction marks. I'm just trying to meet in the on the same line as that. So yeah, it's not a bad call to lay it all out. Yeah, I'm not having fun with these today.
I don't think you
Say again?
I said I don't think you have yourself, like when someone talks, they appear. I forget what you call it.
Spotlight.
Thin.
Yeah, exactly. You don't have
Say that
yourself
one more time.
You don't have yourself
Oh,
spotlighted.
spotlighted. I'm sorry. No wonder I'm looking so small up on the screen. Thank you for that reminder. Better? Okay. So again, speed is important. And you can't run these too slow, or you'll, as you saw, they catch. I've got one of my prongs that's not in one of my cutaways that's not where I want it to be, but it's because the upper one is not where it should be. So I've just made my first notches, and now I'm going to go back and use files to continue the cleanup and make it more consistent to the shape that I want. So this is just rough shaping at first, and then adding any finesse, any angles, any edging that you want. And remember, if you're using the cut across with your file, to go from both sides and try to get something consistent width and height across it. And you'll see that I'm not getting, because I didn't have my top prongs lined up very well, I've got sort of wonky all over the place. This one's in pretty good shape relative to everything else, but these are off center. So if my tops had been better, this would have been as well. But I just wanted to show you guys the exercise of this cutting away. Again, I can go as far as little as I want. I can switch over to a wider file and work it down some more. Actually, that's a little too narrow of a cut. I probably need to get something better, closer to the, I'm going to go triangle file just to show that. And in this case, I'm using the angling to give myself that sort of chevron-y effect. So I'm not cutting straight across with a triangle, I'm cutting down to give myself that look. And I'll do a couple opposite each other with that style. And I'll do a couple that I do with a larger round file once I get that far. And if you are a little off center, sometimes you can do a little correcting if you're willing to open up the gap you've made. So that's what I'm trying to do to get these looking a little bit more centered, even though it may be a hopeless case given the prongs that I built on the other end.
Rachel,
And again, if I want to get that steeper curved look from the front, from the sides of the piece, I'm going to angle my filing so that I'm bringing it down the front instead of just working on the across action. I'm pulling it down the front of the piece to give it a little bit more depth to the shape that I'm putting in. Yep, really bleeding. Hang on.
Rachel,
Yeah.
couldn't you put the small little tube that you're trying to get such details into like your GR little ball that you bought, or like you know, the wood holder where it's
To
got
hold
like a
the
little,
position.
Ring clamp.
yeah, the ring clamp.
So I would love for the ring clamp or for the GRS to be the thing for me. But I find that it gets in the way of the amount of movement I want to make when trying to shape something. If it works for you, go for it. Absolutely. That's the right idea. There should be a way to hold this in place cleanly, but it's so small and I have such a hard time managing my own hands at this point relative to what I'm cleaning up that I just don't find, I don't have the patience to stick it down in pitch or anything like that and then have to pull it up and change it for every angle I want to get to. But there's lots of whatever holding it works for you, whatever mechanism or material works to hold it for you. When I'm doing small scale work, I just have to sort of be able to position it wherever I want. And that certainly adds to my messy factor for sure. All right, so let me bring this over to the close-up cam briefly, just so you can see what I have put in here for silly side effects. So on some of them, I've done an angle cut with the triangle. And on some of them, I've done a curvier, into screen, a curvier look with the round. So triangular and round. And now I'm going to solder that other piece back on and it creates the negative spaces. Oops, am I missing a whole bunch of chats? I am missing chats. What did people ask? Oh, just the what page. Yep, okay. All right, so back to the pieces. Make sure that you know which side is the up. What side was the sawing done on, because otherwise you're going to have something that's too small because it's the other side of it's the other end of the conical piece. And just check that your piece is still going to sit well on it. If everything is right, you haven't filed too much away, you should be in good shape to do that. Boy, this is disappearing on screen today, isn't it? Does that help or hurt? So we can work either up or down on this one. I think I'm going to work from upside down, just because then I can position very small bits of solder on each of the connection point. The biggest risk factor in this pile is that I might accidentally melt the small ring, because that's the thinnest. And I'm betting John wants us to use hard solder because he says use hard solder throughout if you can. So we're going to try it with hard solder, but if you have to go to a medium for this kind of reconnect, do so. Just remember that you may need that medium to attach this piece to something else. So if you can get it working with the hard solder, by all means try. So I'm just putting a little bit of solder on each of the prong points, or what's left of the prongs. think I need to buy myself some fresh picks, because these are sticking like crazy lately. It's way more solder than I want. Okay, so I've got a little bit on each tip. I'm gonna bring my tiny piece up into heated position a little bit and get this ready to flow. If I can, I want my flow to be just starting. There we go. This is the tricky part, is getting it centered right where you want it. Oh. A little bit off center. So I think that I didn't check that it was all still nice and round, because I've got a little bit of wonkiness on one side, but I think I'll be able to deal with it with a little bit of judicious filing if I'm careful. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so now we have a true crown in that it has the prongs of the uprights, and then it also has all of our cutaway pieces. It's a sloppy crown. I'll definitely be doing this until I get much cleaner at it. But the idea is there at least. And let me pickle this, and then we'll take a look at it in cleaned up form. And if you have a hard time with that from up above, from down below, you could also do it from, you can do it right side up. It may be, I would still be putting my solder on each of the 4 prong points and then flip that over on top of the little ring, if that helps you position better. I sort of 50-50 on being able to see the prongs more or being able to see the ring I'm attaching. I think maybe in that exercise, opposite of what I did. So the ring on the brick, position my solder still on each of the prongs, but lift the prongs and rest them down onto the ring. Might have been a little bit easier to perfectly center it, just because I would be seeing what I'm landing on. I thought I was going to have an easier time in the way that I did it, but we'll see. Questions about that? I mean, that's cutting and filing. Lots of cutting and filing and precision. More precision than you saw me do.
Can
Yeah.
I just offer a tool that might be helpful? I don't know if are you familiar with the guillotine clamps from New Concepts?
Mm-mm.
Um,
Hang on, let
They
me
look-
spotlight you.
oh, I love being spotlighted.
Whoa, what's it made
It's-
out of?
They have a steel and they have a brass version.
Huh.
And these, this is either, I think this is wood, or the other one might be leather or something, but it's only 1/4 of an inch high. And so you could put it flat on your bench pin, you know, and hold it up and not have to worry about holding.
Oh. You're talking about
the-
for filing.
Yeah, well, for the burring and the filing, yes.
Sorry, I was like, you want
Oh.
me to use wood and leather when I'm positioning it to solder? What?
No,
Okay,
no.
sorry, my brain has caught up.
No,
with you.
just-
Okay, so
Just to hold it when you're you know,
huh.
when you're filing and doing that stuff.
Yeah, if you have a link to that, I would love if you toss it in chat for us. Because I'm
Okay,
I'll go looking
I'll
at it.
I'll try and find that, but you know, it really, you know, I got it and I didn't know what I was going to use it for, but it really does come in handy, and it's only 1/4 of an inch high, so
Yeah.
it's not like you're, you know, down in the depths of something.
Yeah. My
So,
biggest worry, one of the reasons that I use a ring clamp as little as I do is that I find I have to put it in there so firmly that I end up squishing things. I don't know
Right.
whether I'll have the same issue with that, but I'm happy to try it. Yeah, anything in a storm because
They're not very, I think the steel one is like $20 or something, you know,
I'll
so,
pick
and the other one is like 40, but it's kind of helpful, you know, so that you don't have to rub your fingers raw with a burr.
yeah, I'm down with that. Thank you.
Okay,
That looks like a great tool. Yeah, for the burrs in particular, you're right. That would definitely hold it in place while not having things in the way. That's my biggest, like, I want it to be able to be, when it's just a straight cut, not a problem. But when I start to file is when I get into trouble with wanting to be able to, I do a lot of moving, and the ball vise is great, but for tiny things, you can only get it held so close, like it gets it. I can't get the angle to do the filing that I want to do. So I'm always on the lookout for new ideas on that one. I've lived so long just using my fingers that they get cut up and it's not a big deal. Like the number of pieces of metal I have stuck in my fingers is kind of absurd. Okay, any other questions on that? Carmen, did I hear you had one or see you hold your hand up for a second on the setting?
No,
No?
I already asked the question.
Oh, okay.
But I
Anybody
think
else?
that that tool from New Concepts seems like it reminds me a little bit of that little jig where you cut the tubes
The miter
and
jig.
exactly.
Yep. Miter jig.
Yeah.
He looks like a little robot to me.
Mhm.
Okay, so while we're waiting for that to clean up, let's talk about the marquee setting that I very carefully pulled out. Oh no, I left it stuck to the board so I wouldn't lose it. Let me get that. And we will talk marquee setting again. So a couple sessions ago, maybe it was 3 now at this point, we built this out of 22 gauge sheet and 16 gauge wire. And this was the one where, to my surprise, because it's a different approach than his step bezels, John wanted us to make each segment separately and then get a clean cut so that we got nice sharp corners. I'm still not sure that I see stones a lot that have such crisp corners as he gets. So I still may go back to doing the kind of cut and fold method of getting my marquee curves. But I like the crispness that we get in order to put the sheet metal on. So maybe that's the real emphasis behind it. And I would say that this setting is like 0.5 millimeter too long for this stone, maybe 1 millimeter. And what I ended up doing between sessions is, in order to get it to seat a little bit, I filed away, give a pointer here. I filed away a little bit of an angle, and this is not something that I would say you'll need to do with every marquee. This is a super fat bellied stone. And this was just not sitting. It's so thick at the ends that it wasn't sitting in a way that I was happy with. So to resolve that, you can modify your bezel. So I just, at the ends to about here and here, I flattened and angled that just like I might if I were doing, say, a setting in a round with a burr setting and so, or something like that in a cup burr. So I've taken away a little bit just to let it sit a little lower on the ship that I've seen this sort of looks like a ship to me. So I wanted it resting neatly. And other than that, I haven't done any trim away yet. So my next step is to trim my sheet into something reasonable. And just like he showed us, I'm going to get you to the page for this one, just like he showed us on cornering on, what section was this? Oh, on page 117. He shows us that we have different ways of doing the corners. I think of these as sort of the ways that picture frames are cornered as well. So the more traditional is straight up box, have it equally folded all the way around. on a marquee, what that will look like. Get the drawing board. On the marquee from the top. There's our little pretty faceted stone. And if we do the traditional, everything is the same, what we'll end up with is something like that, right? And that approach is the one where we're using a very, very fine saw blade and cutting and folding and cutting and folding. It's the same exact technique we used when we were doing it on cornering step bezels. So it is in essence a piece of a step bezel. The other version that he provides is one where you cut away a little bit, you file down so that it creates something more like that, right? And so that one, the way that these look before we start doing anything from the back, let me see, this one is going to look like that, right? All the same height. And this one is going to look like that. Because what we're, well, like that. Because what we're doing for this one is we're filing down. So this total height is shorter. This might be, say it's 10 millimeters. This might be 8 millimeters or 6 millimeters or whatever the differential you want in those. And just this much, but on this one, it'll be an even amount. So it's the same height all the way along is going to show. So this is the material that will fold over. And this is the material that will fold over to get those two different looks, right? So we can decide what we think is going to look best on this one, given the drawn out length of a marquee. I think I'm going to go with the filed down version. But either way, I still need to know where my stone hits the material. So I'm going to mark, I've put Sharpie down. I need to refresh it. It looks like I've been playing around with this a little bit since then. I'm going to put Sharpie down so that I can score mark it. And the score mark that I'm making is right at the edge of the upper edge of the lower edge of the crown. So I'm just trying to get a mark that says this is the minimum height it needs to be. And I find, especially with this chubby stone that I've got here, that it wants to rock. So I've got to pretty seriously hold it in place so that it doesn't go sliding front to back or side to side. It doesn't tip on me. And then I'm just scoring it right where the stone meets that top edge, which is a little trickier to get into than not. Same thing on the other side. Err on the side of a little extra material that you're going to be taking away. So this mark is not what we're cutting to, it's what the fold mark is going to hit. It's where we're going to be pushing it over the stone. Mark those a little more clearly because the scratch marks are barely showing. And then I need material to come up and over, but I don't need as much as I've got. So I'm going to give myself, I'm going to trim away all but about a millimeter of fold over, and then I'll do the rest with filing. So there are my calipers. And note that not all stones are going to be equal on each side of the, each end of the stone. So make sure that you're doing your measurements relative to the height as it sits on one side or the other. meaning give yourself the same amount of height, but make it relative to where the crown sits on a given end. In this case, it looks like one end of mine is likely to tip a little taller than the other. And then I'm going to keep going with a fine saw blade because I have one and it'll give me a little bit more control. And I'm just going to trim off some of the excess. Remembering to put my goggles on. Let's forget that part. Side. It's catching on today. Okay, check it once you've trimmed it. It's still probably far more material than I actually need. Sure, I got which side I had where too. Yeah, I'm gonna do the rest with files because I want to take this edge down. And what I'm looking to do, I couldn't figure out where I put my Sharpie, is I'm looking to take this down at a bit of an angle to give myself that second look that I drew. Right, so I'm just going to be filing straight down the point of this. And I'm going to check it as I go because I want to see how it's going to fit. Okay, so once I've got the start to that cut. Goodness, I'm fumbly today. And I think I need to take a little bit more away because I'm just going to have a little more than I like folding over. So I'm just judging what distance of material looks like it's going to crease. What's going to come over the top when I crease it, rather. I'm liking that angle for it so far. Do the same thing to the other side. And keep an eye on whether your 2 points are hitting at about the same angle. You're not going to exactly hit at the same depth depending on the size of your stone, I mean, the balance of your stone, but you don't want to have one way over and one way under. So this one is probably as far as it can go, but I need to take a little more off this side. Deciding one side looks better up than down. There we go. That side's looking good. This side, I think, still needs some material taken away. That's gonna hit. One corner is a little too tall still. And then I want to take off the little burr bits that are from the filing, so it's just a little cleaned up. Which I will use my handy dandy crossing file. Just not that rough a little bit. And at this point, I'd want to go in and do a full polish on everything before I actually set the stone. I know we don't do a lot of that during my demos because it's just tedious. So I'm going to make up for that a little bit if I can figure out where I put my sanding disc when I took it off. I'm going to just do some quick sanding of this to clean up the edges a little. Where did you go? Pull another one out. Has anybody got a source for anything in a sanding disc that is finer than about the 220 range? Because that's my big frustration with sanding discs, is I haven't found any really fine cleanup discs. Anyone?
Have you used the PSA?
What was that?
Have you used the PSA discs?
No, I don't know what PSA discs are. Gonna have to give me more.
I'll try and find it and see if I can post something.
Okay, is it still a sanding disc like this, or is it a different form?
Well, it's like the sanding film, but it comes, you put it on a flat mandrel. You know, you wouldn't be able to do it upside down like that, but I think it comes pretty fine.
Gotcha.
I'll look it up.
Yeah. What I love about these is the flexibility and the ability to flip them upside down or right side up. So when I was first taught about these, I was always taught with them upright, and I could never control it enough. As soon as I went, duh, you can put them upside down, it makes a whole lot more sense to me. Or
I never use them. I never use them upright. I never use them upright.
Oh yeah. The other thing I've done is not with this type of mandrel, but you can put two facing each other, and you can put flat pieces in between the two discs and clean things up from both sides at once, which is really nice. But you have to have one of the screw mandrels for that, not these pop-ons. So again, proper procedure would be that I get this fully shined up, nice and clean. I'm just taking out the big scratches and trimming down a little bit of the rough around it. I also tend to want to blunt just ever so slightly the sharpest corners so that they're not, you know, like stocking patchers. All right, we're gonna call that polished. Isn't that delightfully polished, folks? Okay, so I now have the framework roughed in. I may yet need to trim a little more off of this. I want to see how it pushes once I start actually moving it around. But as with all cornered faceted stones, what do we do to the corners? We ball burr out a little divot. Even though this is so oversized for its piece that it probably doesn't need it, and it's a fairly blunt point, it's a good practice to get into. Is always give yourself that safety bubble. And I gotta say, I've chipped enough stones during the course of this project so far that anything that might help not chip another stone is good. So I'm just using a ball burr right at the corner. That's way too big of a ball burr for this corner though. Hang on a sec. That's a little better. And if it's a steep corner like this, sometimes what you need to do is one ball burr first to dig in to either side, and then take a second ball burr right into in between, because this is going to create a divot to each side, and it doesn't really put a gap at the very corner itself. So it's sometimes a two-step process. And you also may need to take it into the material, the wire frame a little bit, if your stone sets very low on the frame. So I'm just giving myself that little extra wiggle room so that when I hit that corner with the push down, I'll be in good shape. And I next want to do a little tiny cut in with the heart burr. This is the one that we learned in doing our initial basket setting with the wire. We learned how to do a version of it with hand filing, but I personally can't hand file into that tiny little angle that we've got. So I got to use some kind of a burr, and I need to make sure that once again, I've marked the point at which I'm folding it, because I managed to sand off my marks. So I want it to fold just as it reaches, it's not a sharp enough mark, just as it reaches the upper edge of the stone. You know, my head's probably getting in your way right now. I apologize. I just have to be able to see this closely enough to.
It's not, Rachel.
Oh, really? I'm getting better at it.
Oops, I spoke too soon.
I need bionic eyes. That's what it comes down to. Okay, so I'm going to switch to a fairly small heart burr. And I've got all the burrs out today. Small heart burr, where is one that I can control in that space? Nope, much smaller than that. I just want one that's going to give me enough grip into this to the line that I can make that slight crease that we need to help with the fold over. So remember, we're folding fairly heavy gauge metal over a fragile stone. We're giving ourselves a little fold line, basically. Okay, and this is another one of those, how are we holding it so that you guys can see it? I don't hurt myself. And we make the cut with it. I don't know, are you guys able to see that working? I'm just doing an ever so slight cut. Yep, and I always find one side of this is harder than the other for control. If you start to see marks on the other side, it means, push throughs. It means you've dug a little too deeply. Always do that loop around when I get to the right-hand side on these. My control issue on that side. I also have to remember personally that certain burrs you need to go faster with. Let me bring this over briefly to the close-up cam just so you can see what I've set up for this. Where am I? There we go. All right, so we have ball bird into the corner. That's not focusing very well, is it? Let me scooch back out a little bit. Okay, so we put a ball burr into the corner, which made sort of a double divot there. And then we heart burred the seam, the crease line that we're going to fold over, and did that to both sides after trimming this back down to what we think we're going to use. Questions on that?
Yeah, you just made a statement that some burrs you need to go faster speed. Is that for the heart burr?
So the heart burr, I find I have more control over it if I remember to do at least a medium speed. I tend to be very cautious when I start out with burrs because I do so much catching of my fingers, but really being too cautious means that it's going to be chattering when it hits. And the problem is you can't consistently say it's all one type of burr because some brands have a different tooth than others. So they're more catchy or less catchy. Ball burrs don't catch unless you have a really coarse one. Like they're going to go whatever, because it's all going in the same exact spot. Like it's all round, right? I find that I need to be at least a fairly moderately good starting speed for the barrel burrs that I was showing. You saw that it was trying to catch a lot, but barrel burrs in particular come in really different coarsenesses. Like the ones I ended up using were a lot finer than the ones that I have here. And those will catch like crazy, whereas the finer ones, starting small and finer, isn't going to catch as quickly. For me, it's a matter of reminding myself that if I keep finding myself fumbling and catching, it's probably because I'm going too slow, not because I'm going too fast. That's not 100% of the time. And also the other thing to remember is different brands, different materials for the burrs have either high speed or low speed heat resistance. So you have to look at whatever manufacturing and type you've got and make sure that by going too fast, you're not burning out your burr quickly. So it's a whole slew of things. In this case, yes, I was talking about the speed on the heart burr needed to be a little, when you probably saw the first side at least, it was flipping around to the back side of it. One, that was because I was going on an uphill angle. This is actually a good thing to talk about. So one of the best actions for controlling the burr control is pull towards yourself, like you're carrot peeling kind of. But I can't do that on the other side and still see my work because I'd have to angle like this and I'd be more likely to catch and flip up. Right? So the hard side for me is that far side where I'm having to push away. I suppose I could pause my machine, flip to reverse and push up the other side and have a similar effect, but I'm there already. So I just need to get better control, just knowing that far side. So when I was going too slowly, I was more inclined to hook and catch over the far side. And that just creates chatter that I'll have to clean up on the back. Any other questions on this before I start the actual setting of it? Okay, let's see which direction we're going. All right, so any number of starting tools are an option. We have we made it during one of our earlier sessions, the brass pusher. We have a more traditional, where's my polished one? Here's my regular everyday pusher. It's not polished. That's a little polished. We have just a standard pusher. And we could use a rocker. Oh, there's my polished one. There we go. So I can just start my life folding at the push. I think this is heavy enough gauge. I think I use 22 gauge that I think I may want to encourage it inward a little bit with my pliers right at the seam line. This is definitely not a John Cogswell approved cheat. But if I have a fold, I want to maybe just pinch it in a little bit to start it so that I'm not going from an upright angle when I start pushing down. If I have the room to get a little head start on the fold over. And I may find that I need to take a little more down at the corner, or this is going to become a combination of that file down effect and sawing down the center of them before I do my pushovers. So just that little bit that I did with the pliers, you can see I've tucked it in a little. To me, that makes all the difference in the world about whether I'm going to slide and slip when I first start to push or not. Now I have a little bit of a head start that I can begin pushing with over the stone, right? Instead of being from upright to over, which I'm more likely to slip and grab. And because I've got those nice crease lines, it knows where I want it to fold. And now it's a matter of pushing down to the stone level. And in this case, I think I still need to take a little bit away using the saw because I've got a little more point than I really want on there before I'm going to get close enough. I'm also a little bit far afield of the stone from a left-right position. This side is folding nicely. This side is sort of pushing outward. So I need to get my my push on the stone to be a little bit more vehemently in and less over. Let me see if I can go with a bigger one. So I'm going to try and get a little bit more in push from the lower edge, right about where the crease is, and then come back and push over again. So we're getting there, but I don't actually like the finished look right now because one side is so much more widely spread apart than the other. I don't know if that's going to come with pushover time. I may also need to grab my hammer handpiece just to give myself a little more hand strength on that. But this one in particular needs some trimming away. So I'm going to revert to that technique where we cut carefully. Again, this is a 4/0. If I have, do I have a 7/0? I might have an even finer one. I'm going to move down to the finest grade of saw blade I have. I think I'm out of 8/0, and I think I only have a 7/0, but that ought to do the trick. No pun intended. Because you want this cut to just act as a skinny little file. You don't want it actually cutting away material. You want it filing away material. So I'm taking it down the center. It's going to be a tricky angle. And I'm watching for watching and listening for when I get close to the stone. All I want to do is act as a file, push a little bit more. This probably would be better to set in, if I had time, I would put it in some of the goop, either I would put it in Thermalock, or I would put it in what's the other stuff we've been playing around with? The
Jet Set.
Pardon?
Jet Set?
Jet Set, shellac, yeah, any of the grabby materials. So again, I'm just doing a cut down, listening for hitting the stone like I just did, and then a push. And I think this one actually needs a little filing away. There's a little too much point left, so I'm going to do flat file. Again, being careful not to hit the stone itself. If I've gone to the stone when I'm filing, I'm way too far. And in this case, I'm going to file a little bit from each side so that I'm thinning the thickest material at the point. And then I'm going to do some more pushing. And this one is starting to look like what I want. This one still is a little far afield. And this may be where I'm seeing the result of my having that extra little space at the end, because it's not truly fitting to the point. It's holding stably, but it's the gap that I'm getting right here feels like that extra little smidge that I had at the end. So I'm going to show you another very definitely not John approved tweak. This is a cheat that I use way more often than I should, which is my pair of flat pliers. I will pinch close a corner. Okay, so I'm working with metal on metal to get a closer
Rachel,
fit.
for me, frozen.
Pardon?
I said,
Oops,
for
you're
me,
on.
you were frozen.
Oh, frozen? Am I frozen for everybody?
And so now
No.
when you click to say, not anymore.
Okay, good.
Oops.
So what I'm doing is I'm grabbing with the pliers, and one of the reasons it's not approved is it marks the heck out of your material, right? It scratches it up, but I'm going to be filing away a lot of this excess that I'm gripping and squeezing. Am I still freezing for you, Wendy? Because you're freezing for me, but nobody else is.
No, you're good.
Okay, good. So I've just done a pinch, and you'll see it gets a little crimp at the end of it. And now I have material I can first file away, and then I'll go to that sawing technique. So I'm taking the extra little nub that I created off. And this is a cheat only if you absolutely must, because it means a lot more cleanup of your setting. And it's riskier with fragile stones, because if you've grabbed and pushed too hard, it's not as controlled of a push down as you get when you're using your bezel pushers, because you're literally squeezing with the clamp of the pliers and risk catching the material in there. So what I'm doing now is taking that little bump down from both sides, because on the point it wants to sort of bunch up. I need to get a little fiberglass brush, but you can see already that's looking happier than it did a few moments ago, right? It looks a lot more like what this one was, instead of having some weird lumping. And now I can go back and try a little more pushing in. I've got a little more gapping. In fact, I may even use the pliers to help encourage that gapping to close. But it marks the hell out of your piece when you do that kind of a cheat. So the only thing that's bugging me is that I still don't have quite the same size gap on both sides. This point shows a little bit more. And it's also got a little bit of wiggle, which means I got to find where I need to push down more. Where's it wiggling? Ah. So on this stone, I'm finding it's holding towards the back, but the front of each of these prongs is not down as far as it could be. And that's probably why I have a wider gap on one side than the other. Much better. Okay, so I think I need to do a little last sand, little last file to get my points to look similar on both sides. So one side I just did the pinch and file method, the other side I did the saw blade. And so until and unless I actually shape them where they meet a little bit more, I'm not going to have exactly the same look on both sides. Okay, we're getting there. And I think at this point, I'd probably do a tiny bit more pushing around of this if this was on a set piece. But at this point, what I'll do is show you what I move to when I'm done with the setting, which is, I've talked about this a lot. The Auto Fry sells them Swifty wheels, the rubberized Swifties. This is the brand I like most because it blends away scratch marks, cracked, solder marks, those marks that I put in when I was doing the pliers squeeze. It helps with that. So it can act as a kind of a final touch up to anything going on. It also blunts any sharp bits that you've got left over nicely, so they aren't as prone to catching. But they are definitely a perishable good. I buy them multi-packs at a time because they wear out quite quickly. And I tend to, if you're only going to buy one shape of them, I would say buy the knife edge, because you can always use them to this, like this started life as a knife edge. Whereas the other ones are just thick all the way through. So, all right, so there we have a relatively set stone Marquis. I'll bring that over to the close-up cam so you guys can see it. And I really do, there's something about this little cutaway version of this that it points back. It has sort of, it feels like spur covers or something like that to me, that angle chevron-y style. We saw it when we did the cushion cut earlier, and I really like that effect on the Marquis as well. It sort of draws the point out for me. Questions on that setting?
It's just really, really pretty.
Thanks. I'm not a huge fan of smoky quartz, but it sure does show the work well. So, all right, let me check the pickle pot and get the other piece out, and then we'll see where we stand. I guess I'll show this one back on the close-up cam again. So here's our crown setting with the cutaways, the not terribly neat and even cutaways, but cutaways nonetheless. It's got a little, that's upside down crown effect, right side up. And I can imagine that this particular look would be a lot nicer on a smaller scale. This is really bugging me how big these upright prongs are. even though I'll be trimming some of the material away were I to set that stone. I will not be setting that stone in this because I'm going to remake this before I am willing to waste putting a stone into it. But I like the potential in this because nothing says it has to be just a single layer that you've cut away. You can get fancy. If you follow, I think I talked about John Mazzaros before. If you follow his work, you'll find that he does some really elegant versions of these where he's using, say, a yellow gold, and then he'll use a white gold or a platinum, or probably he's doing the opposite. He's probably doing platinum prongs and then a yellow gold replacement, you know, segment to it. And then you might put another thing below that. So the idea of this is a really cool one. The implementation of it is trying to my patience personally.
But you know what? I can see like a nice, beautiful ball bead, and you know,
A what?
a ball bead, a round bead.
Set in this, in the crown?
Yeah.
Huh. Okay, you're gonna have to do that and show us, because I'm not picturing it. You're just plonking it down in there and pushing it over so that some of the ball shows through the segments. Is that what we're thinking?
Yeah, because you were saying it's so tall, but you can use that shape
Yeah,
to fill it with something that's going to fill it since you've done the work.
yeah.
And I can see a round bead in there. You know, they have so many beautiful beads too. Or even a pearl, a round pearl or something.
Oh, yeah, I would probably make it a little less steep if I were gonna do a round pearl. But the idea of making the multi-layered crown is definitely a good one. And one of the other high-end, you know, wedding ring style things that's done is often somebody will set a stone up underneath. So there's the main stone, the diamond or something, and then they'll set upside down a sapphire or something, because then the blue of the sapphire comes through the diamonds. Some cool effects like that. So that's when you get into the fancy bling that I'm never going to be able to make, and I don't care. I don't wear that, but I appreciate the art that goes into it. So, okay, where are we at for time? 6 o'clock. So my plan was to start the emerald basket. Based on it being an emerald cut, I'm not entirely convinced we will get all the way through it in one setting. So my question is whether we do that and or skip ahead. Am I prepared to skip ahead to one of the others? I think I'm not. So I think what I want to do is I think I want to the basket for the emerald cut, I think, is worth starting, even if we don't get all the way through it. And because it's 2 segments of essentially the same activity, which is we're making the emerald basket and a frame, and then we're making another emerald frame that fits right above it. So, and on this one, I'm having played around with it a few times now. I'm going to encourage your first one to make the 2 2 pieces the same size. Don't try for your first emerald cut to do an angled basket like we've done on some of the other stones, because man, that adds to the work. So we are on page, which page is it on? We are on page 114. And we're working with 16 gauge wire. Let me get a couple of things out of my way on the bench so that projects are not taking up the space for this one. And the challenge on this one is that it is not cut like any of our other setups. We are cutting this one from the outside to get the angles we need, rather than from the inside. Remember that my big challenge on the emerald cut step bezel is getting precision interior cuts to get the folds that we need. I actually find the exterior cut approach a lot easier. It's certainly more obvious when you're making a mistake, in my opinion, like when you're measuring wrong. And what I found is John is recommending on the bottom of page 114 that you take all your measurements and then you lay them all out. Once again, that fails me on a regular basis. So I'm going to be doing this a segment at a time because I can see it, because I can watch it. I can make an adjustment while I'm on the fly, because otherwise it's guaranteed I'm going to lose space by the time I get all the way around the corner. So more power to him, but I'm doing it a piece at a time. So I've pre-straightened a bunch of 16 gauge. I annealed it and straightened it, relatively speaking. Let me cut off the end that I was chomping in the vise. And this emerald cut is a moderately well cut stone. It's not perfect, but it's better than the one I was trying to use when I did my other emerald cut attempt. And so I am going to make use of, first I'm going to check my sizes on the stone to make sure that I have consistent corners.
You want to change camera
Thank
for
you.
me?
Yep, sorry about that. So I'm going to confirm that my corners are in fact the same, or as close as makes no never mind, because that's the hard corner. Like all the short and the long side are pretty easy. So this is consistent in its cornering. So I'm going to just lock my calipers in. If you have multiple sets of calipers, your life is going to be made easier on this one, because we're alternating that side in with the other sides. And then the next thing I'm going to do is he wants us starting on a long edge. No, he wants us starting on a short edge, but he wants us leaving a little extra hanging off the end of the short edge. Unless I mark my actual starting point that I'm going to be counting it based on, I'm going to go nuts. So this is my extra over here. It's this little bit here. Let me do it with a color you guys can see. Where's my blue pen? Blue pen. So this is my extra. And I'm going to start my marking. And I'm going to actually put a little notch with the saw where I'm going to be starting. This is not the first actual cut. This is just a notation of where I think I'm starting my measurements from. And then I'm going to mark my first short corner. And one of the things that I found particularly important as I was building these is that I remember that there's kind of a top at this point, because we want all of our base cuts to be on the same surface of the round wire. So I'm just putting in a notch, and he wants us going, how far does he tell us to cut through? The interiors. Doesn't actually give us a good description on this of how deeply. Interior bends. Yeah, he doesn't tell us how far, but in the visuals, he's not going more than halfway. It's not as complete of a cut as we did when we were trying to do a full fold or anything like that. So I'm just going to go a small cut halfway through, and I'm going to pause, and then I'm going to mark a starting point, a starting side on the stone, so that I know that I have now just done one corner leading up to that first wall. And then the next measurement, I'm going to take my second, I'm going to use my dividers as my second pair of calipers and get the short side. If I had 3 sets of good electronic calipers, or even 2 at this point, I would lock the measurements in for all my sides. If it's a well-calibrated stone, if it's not a well-calibrated stone, I'm not going to bother because I have to check each side one at a time anyhow. So we're going to assume this is a not well-calibrated stone and act accordingly. Once again, make sure that I'm cutting on the same surface. I don't want to have one part twisted beyond where I'm making the other cuts. And just about halfway through. And John would have us fold each of these folds as we go. I personally found it was easier to get the first 2 marked in like this and then start my folding. And I didn't want to do more folding than necessary. So I really only want a little bit of a bend at the corner and then start my turn. And what this should cover is that first bend. Okay. And the other thing that I discovered is that I need my long and short sides, excuse me, my sides basically to be just under the size or just at the size that I measure. But I actually need to take a smidge off of my corners from, I don't want a measurement of the outside. I want a measurement just under the edge of the wall, or else I end up with, let me see, I started one that I wanted to show you guys. Where's my started one? Or else I end up with material hanging over. So we don't want literally the size of, I'm not gonna be able to show it with the prongs. I was practicing my prong stuff. We don't want literally the length of this. We want ever so slightly smaller than that, so it rests on those corners. I am saying that so badly. I hope you let me draw it. Words are failing me right now. Let me draw.
So you're like making a line to hold it instead
Yeah.
of on
Yeah,
the corner.
What I found, if this is my stone, what I found is if I measured corner to corner on everything, I ended up having a wire that even though we are folding it under, what we're counting on is that compression of folding it under. What I found was I had wire hanging out halfway beyond the lip of it. So I needed to do some trim back a little bit. So I have to pick a component that I'm going to make ever so slightly smaller. And I may be actually telling you backwards. I may mean not these little guys, but the big guys I need to do. Yeah, I am absolutely telling you backwards. So the corners you make to width. Corners I make to the actual width. And these I need to make a smidge smaller, which I just didn't do. So we'll see if I can fix it in post-production. So this, because what I want is for my wire to be basically here. This wire is going to be okay because it's taking the brunt of the fold. So keep your short corners the actual point A to point B, but keep these B to C minus a hair. We will see that if I don't do it well, if I don't give myself enough trim back, you'll see what I'm talking about in this, but that's my belief is what I need to adjust from simply measuring all of the measurements. And let me see if I can actually start to show you where it will. Oh, I'm going to take some of this material off that's getting in my way.
So Rachel, when you mark the wire that you're bending, you're marking the wire with the Sharpie where you're going to bend it and where you're going to cut into it. Are you going to be that precise?
Yeah, this is the one that precision is critical. This is why emerald cuts do me in, right? So I'm being very, very precise on my corners. And what I'm trying to show is I need to be just enough. Here, let me actually make that final cut and bend to give you a corner, and it'll make more sense. One more corner and I'll be able to display what I'm trying to articulate to you guys.
Okay, so you're going to be precise on the corners, but then when you said when you're going from C, you're going to go a hair smaller.
Yes, and I'm going to try and show that in just a moment. Once you can see what the bends do under the stone, because what I was finding is every bloody time I was making one of these, it was too big, but it was not too big in all directions. It was too big at certain edges. And I'll see if I can show that in this layout now that I've got enough corners to cut. Okay, so we've made, this was our first corner from here to here. And then we've got our first short edge, and we got the second corner, and we're starting down the line. See if I can hold this in a way that you guys will be able to see it. So if I make this length to be exactly corner to corner, when I open it out, this actually widens, because this isn't, when we were doing the step bezel, folding it compressed, and so it got shorter. The reverse happens here because we're opening it out, so I was getting too wide here. So, and when I say a fraction less, I mean like a saw blade less than the width that you've measured here, because all we need is for this to sit just under the stone, right? Do I have, maybe this will show better on something white. Let me see what I've got. So when the stone is resting, without having the whole thing, it's kind of hard to hold it, but when the stone is resting on the frame we're making, we need the frame to be hidden, but not way hidden. Like we can't have it tucked under. We have to have it resting under. So it has to be lined up, because we're going to be building the uprights that run right into each of these cut marks we're making, right? If this is too far underneath the stone, then those wires will have to lump out. The uprights will have to lump out in order to support the stone, and that won't work. If it's too far overhanging, the uprights are too far away from the corners of the stone that they're trying to support, and so they won't hold it because it'll be too loose, right? So what I've found from my experience, and your mileage may vary, is that if I keep my corners very precise and I take that hair's breadth, saw blade thickness worth less on the width that I'm doing for short and long sides, that it's just enough to keep that resting where I want it. Did that make more sense now that I've got the slight visual?
But you're not
Yeah.
doing that with saw blades on both ends of that. You're just doing one end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What I'm doing is making I'm taking the actual measurement, the actual caliper measurement from corner to corner, and then I'm just cutting on the saw blade just inside of the line I've made. That's what I found. It really is nominal amounts that you want to take away from the properly measured outside edge. And it also may have to modify if you're using a very heavy wall, or like it may depend on the proportions of your material to a certain extent too, because it's about that compression versus expansion problem. All of our compression helps tuck when on the step bezels, this material was getting compressed in and therefore smaller on the inside, but here it's opening out. And so we're trying to counter that. So that was a bit of a ramble. What that means for me is I've now done regular short, regular corner, short, that is a hair's breadth shy, regular corner. I'm now going to do regular long, less that saw blades width again. So I'm going to take this with the dividers. So I'm again measuring the actual corner to corner, marking it, and then just cutting inside of it. And this gets harder to not get your piece of wire in the way the further along you get. So it's another one of those, how do you hold it to get the marks you need? So I'm using my cut corner to make my mark, and then I'm just sawing right to the right of the line. So always aware that I want my cut lines to be on the same surface as the other cuts. Come on, little guy. And I'm not going to make that next bend until I've put another corner in, because it's much harder to bend the tiny corners. And once again, on the tiny corners, I'm keeping them at the actual mark. And then we're going to check our bends. And we got to be careful that we're not torquing things like I am right now. And we're going to pause and check. Again, John describes it in the book as being just mark them all out and make all the folds. But I find I either over or undercut, and I'd rather make the discovery of that at the outset. Like I may have overcut this one. Let's see. Oh my gosh. What? I'm sitting that way for right now. Yep, I'm a smidge too big. So I didn't trim away enough, because you can see that that long side means that this end of it is hanging over the edge more than I want. So this is the back and forth that I'm going to have to do to get myself to the correct size. Now, this is why I made myself extra wire, because I can start from here. I can trim off just a couple of my cuts, and this can become my starting corner, and I can just work from there. So I'm going to trim. Do I want to do a short edge? I don't think I want to do a short edge. Oh, on this stone, I probably can get away with doing a short edge on one of these. So let me see if I can recover a little bit of my cut by that.
So where are you extra?
So the length, my long side, I didn't trim enough of a hair's breadth away. It's literally like I could get a fingernail tucked under the far edge, what would be the short end, because this was ever so slightly too long. And I'm sure that there are people who are more mathematically inclined than I that can figure out the exact measurements that you should be using based on looking at the angle of the side of the stones cut and stuff like that. I'm never going to be that person. Just not. If you guys come up with magical math ways that you can teach me, I will happily hear them. So right now what I'm trying to do is turn my long side into a short side, cutting just inside of my measurement. And then I'm going to take the next chunk of it and make another short side. And this is one of those ones that we can't do any cool squeeze it to make it fit tricks easily, because it's a really fragile structure as is. We're not soldering the components. So my recovery thus far has been to just put back out of my long side that didn't do well to create my short side. And now I'm going to take more away than I did the last time on the long side. So going corner to corner. So that's my mark, but I'm going to go inside of it. And I would bet that what it really is something like you need half of the width of your wire or something to be the exact mathematical bend that we care about. And again, before I make this bend, I'm going to put in my next corner. Marks too unclear. Okay, so round 2 of trying to get our long side bent where it needs to go.
Drum roll.
Right. Much happier with that. There we go. So that is now going to rest on top of the frame without stuff hanging over, but also not tucked in so far that it can't be accounted for in the uprights. Okay. And then we go back to do another short side. Again, remembering to trim away from it. And if you've got a well-calibrated stone, you may want to check before you cut for this next turn that the mark is consistent with what you ended up with inside the other side. And it looks like I am. And consistent with that. So again, cutting just inside of the mark I've made. And then before I bend, I'm putting another one of my corners in. Seems like there are no ends to the corners. Amazingly, I think there are only 4 on this stone. I think that's how it works. But it feels like bunches. Okay, magical next bend, corner, the long side. And if you can start with a well-calibrated stone so that your sides truly are fairly consistent, it'll become really quickly apparent if you have not done this well, because you'll be way out of square by the time you've done all of your corners. This is looking pretty decent for a first pass. There we go. Okay, so now I need to, John has us cornering across the point at which this corner, where we marked our first corner, that we had left a little extra overhang. So he wants us cutting between the two. And where does he describe that? So he does, he shows it in the bottom rightmost picture on page 114, where we're cutting diagonally across at the point at which this would end. So I'm just going to put my saw blade in from the inside. And I made that initial mark, and I'm going to go, yeah, I want to actually mark out my long width so I know I'm aiming for the right size on the other side, but bear with me. I'm going to do that based off of checking this.
Rachel, could you move your head over just a tad so I can see where you're?
So I'm checking my already made long side,
Mhm.
and I want to compare it to where I'm going to land my cut on the other side. Now I'm also going to check it against my stone, because this is making sure that I've actually measured. So this is the smaller size. I may have to go a little bigger. There we go. That matches my cut marks. So I'm making a mark just so I know where I'm headed when I cut across. And you can't really see it because it's underneath, but it's right there where this will cut across. And finding the right position to actually aim for that. So in theory, I've done a decent job of cutting. I'll be able to solder that as is, but in practice, I think I need to take a smidge off of the little corner because it hit the angle that I had created a little oddly. Let's see.
To me, seems like there would be way too much material.
Where?
When you did that cross cut, I'm just looking at the picture, just seems like there's going to be way too much when you fold those two in together.
So you're not folding them together. You're cutting just like when we cut across a ring band with a saw blade. What we're doing is creating, in theory, the join point for soldering them closed. So this is the only corner that won't already have its little saw cut mark that we're gonna still have to file in the divot that we're gonna put things into. But yeah, it's gonna, in this case, it takes a little cleanup, I think, of the angle that I got. But you'll see, like, that's the one right there. That's the one that is
The corner. I get it now. Okay, I get it.
Yep. So which is why he had us leave the overhang, because we're going so what he doesn't have us do in leaving the overhang is he doesn't have us make that initial saw cut where that first point of the corner does. That's why I made that, because I needed a guide to tell me this is the spot you're cutting to. And so that trick is not in his book. It's at the very beginning when we're creating the first mark. I leave overhang, but I cut the mark ever so slightly. So now I have actually a fairly good fit, and I'm going to bring it over to the bench and solder it. Hard solder, as with all things small and fiddly for John's bezels, for John's settings. whenever possible. We're using the hard solder. And we're only soldering that one sawed corner. So we don't have to put solder in each of the cut corners like we did when we were doing cornering on the sheet metal stuff. So, and I'm using chip solder, and I'm using a very small amount of it, just enough to make it a stable corner. It's so stable, I can't tell which of the two corners I'm supposed to solder. There we go. Yep, I really wish I'd put fresh picks on my last order from Rio. Try and clean these off again next time. So this is where that quick flicking action that John likes for the small soldering works really nicely, just to get that little bit of flow, because we've made those cuts in there. So every one of our other cut areas is our weak spot on soldering, in that we could melt it apart at those corners. So I've now got frame one. I see a tiny bit of wonkiness that may make me want to cut a little bit down from that. I'm going to have to look at how it looks with the stone in place. That is flux getting into my cut. Hang on a sec, gang. That stings. Okay, so we've got our base frame, and now the exciting part is we got to make another one exactly like it. But I am not going to do that on screen today. That I think is a good stopping point for this one, because we need to have two perfectly matched frames, both of which fit, or we need to, if you're going to go crazy and you want to try that angled version, you'll make your next one ever so slightly smaller. I would not recommend making it any smaller than it just fits inside of the prior one. Meaning if you were to lie them flat, they'd nest perfectly inside of each other. Any smaller than that, and you're going to start having real challenges. This is much harder to get our prongs set up than on our other settings, because on our other on the ones that we were doing before, like a round, we're setting them across from each other so we can create a little V, but we're creating pairs at the corners, and so the angle is weird already. So before you try a steeply angled version of this, maybe get yourself comfortable with simply an upright basket frame on it. Questions about any of that I've done thus far? It's a lot. It's a delicate little one, and we're soldering on 8 prongs instead of 4, so it gets harder as we go. But once I've got those 2, then we will file in the cut marks into the notches, and we'll start making the uprights for it next time. And we should be able to get through this next session, and then I'm thinking I may consider tossing the little square wire prong one into next session, just because it's a quick and dirty, make something in a hurry. Because I don't have another one yet to set until I make some better crown settings than these. I'm not willing to actually put a stone in any of the crown settings I've made so far. So with that in mind, any last questions or any show and tell for me? I've been waiting a whole month for show and tell. Who's got stuff? I'm seeing Wendy, maybe.
I don't have it with me, it's on my bench, but I was so frustrated with just a tube setting. And it's been 2 days. I cannot get it level, and I cannot figure out what I'm doing wrong. You know, I put 2 jump rings in the tube setting, and I took my stone setting burr and went down in.
Yeah.
I thought it looks level to me, but I cannot get that stone level. Any suggestions? Start over, throw it away.
No, I want to back up a step. So you put 2 jump rings in?
Instead of making an inner tube bezel, putting another tube inside of that because I didn't have a tube that was the
Thick enough.
correct, it was too
Okay.
much gappy. So I made 2 jump rings and put in.
So you soldered 2 jump rings together to make the equivalent of a wall. Got it. Got it. Okay. And you have confidence, you've measured with your calipers or something that the jump ring itself is level relative to the height of the rest of your wall. Yes.
I think so. The only thing I didn't do was take the back end, the back end of your calipers and do the depth on it.
Yep.
And
So
maybe I can do that tomorrow.
that's one possibility. The other is look at your stone. Is it lopsided? I've had stones that are cut like cantilevered. So you may never be able to get it there, right? You might have to fake it out. Then the next thing is to look at how are you doing your downward action of drilling? If at all possible, if you have, say, one of the Fordham flex shaft drill presses or something, set your stuff up and make sure that you're using the drill press action, because then it has to go straight up and down, right? So if it's really fighting you, for me, it's either that or I go sideways and rest my burr on my bench pin so that I know I can only go in at the angle I need to. But if you're really there's nothing that beats a drill press if you can access what you need to on your drill press, because that's as straight up and down as you can get with a burr cut.
Okay, I'll try that. I have the Dremel workstation.
Yeah, that'll do it.
Drill press. Yeah.
That'll do it.
Okay.
And then otherwise it's practice. Yeah.
I know, but it's 3 weeks away. I need this done.
Oh, this is a Christmas present or something? Got
They're
it.
little
Oh,
tiny 4mm blue diamonds. And why the hell I started with diamonds? I must be crazy.
is this silver or gold you're setting them in?
No, she only wears silver. So
Okay.
they would look prettier in gold, but no, she only wears silver. So
Okay. The other thing is it a heavy enough wall bezel, or are you fighting the thickness of the outer wall at all?
no, the outer wall is pretty thick.
Okay, good. Yep. And lastly, I would say oftentimes if you've drilled in, you may be drilling too deep. And so you've got so much material over the top that you may need to take some off and reposition.
Yeah. Okay.
What's making it look off is that you have too much material around it.
Okay. That could be a possibility. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
So, sure. There you go. Some ideas. Anybody else have questions or show and tell? Show and tell? Anyone? Please. You guys are killing me with this. You got something, Betsy?
It's not very exciting. And I had a bunch of drewsies, which I generally don't sell because they're coated and everything, and people are really careless with stuff. So, but I just thought they were pretty. So I was just playing around. So I made one ring.
Ooh,
Wow.
nice.
That's sparkly.
And I went a little crazy. It's flat on, it kind of looks like a patch of dirt or something, but it's goldish. I went a little crazy decorating the bezel though. So, which I really kind of like that technique with a checkering file.
Nice. Oh, yeah. So that unfortunately the graininess on my camera is not.
Yeah,
enough.
no, you can't.
But I love checkering files. Yeah.
Yeah, you can't really
Cool.
see.
Well, I'm a
and
big
then-
fan of druzy.
And this is just another druzy,
Oh, that's
just
a
a-
fun piece.
big honkin' stone.
Nice. Very
Oh.
nice. And I like you left a little rim around that one.
Yeah, just a tiny little rim. But it's very simple because I don't like to get too crazy with the drewsies because you never know when the coating's going to wear off or something like that. It's not like a forever ring. So but at least I made something.
Nice.
It's been a while.
Nice.
So
I solved that by only using uncoated drewsies. I cannot stand the look of a coated drewsy up close.
well, I don't buy them anymore, but these I think
No.
I've had for 10 years or something.
Yeah.
So I was just looking for stuff that I didn't really have to, and my life's been kind of upside down lately, and I didn't want to have to focus too much.
Yeah.
So I figured, what the hell,
People
So-
love them, just because it's not our thing to have the coded versions, you will
Right.
sell that piece if you try to sell it or give it to somebody who they'll appreciate the heck out of it, because people love that bling.
Yeah,
For me, it's
I
just a
know.
different, it's the work that I want to do, I want to have natural jerseys in. I'll use it.
Yeah, I prefer that also, and it's just, this is just stuff I've had forever because at the time it was pretty and I didn't know all the pitfalls of it, so.
Mhm.
Some
Yeah.
of those I hold for, we have a local, our guild has a local swap once a year.
Mhm.
And you can get somebody else who likes shiny coated blingy things and trade them for what
Yeah.
you want instead at some point.
Yeah,
But those are fantastic. That especially like
Yeah.
the sort of volcanic looking feel of that second one that you showed. That's fabulous.
yeah, it's just a very odd stone, and the first one, this one, I used 20 gauge fine silver for the bezel, so I played around with doing a really
The
thick
heavy one.
bezel, so
Nice.
so
Did
that
you hand
was.
set it or did you hammer set it or what?
Oh, well, I started off hand setting and I ended up using a hammer and a Delrin,
Rod.
yes, thank you.
Nice.
So just to push it in a little more. The sides are pretty straight, but there's just enough curve to keep the stone in. So, and the bezel actually, it fits very well into the bezel, so it's not moving around at all, so.
The heft of that wall is really nice counterpoint to the crystal elements of it. So I like that.
Yeah.
A lot. I think that was a
Yeah,
great
it's
choice.
just kind of different.
And Betsy,
Cool.
what do you have on as a necklace? Is that a brooch or a necklace, or what's that
Oh.
shiny bling on your neck?
Oh,
the
it's part of my
shirt.
t-shirt.
Oh, well, it's pretty. Said it.
Well, thank you.
That's lovely. That's lovely. All right. Anybody else want to show and tell anything? Okay.
I just
Yep.
got an order, but it wasn't for anything like that. I just did a bunch of pearl bracelets that, were potato pearls and all of that kind of stuff.
Are you knotting them yourself?
No, I'm actually just stringing them and then combining it with the leather and then with the clasp and all of that. So
Very cool. Hey, if you get an order at this time of year, that's not a bad thing to be able to
I
make
know
some
that's
money.
why I kind of stopped because they wanted 10 of them. So I'm like,
Oh my
okay.
God.
Yeah. Yeah.
Those are scary last minute Christmas orders. I will pull over a couple of works in progress of mine. Just because I never do that with you guys. Let's see, there's that and a piece that some of you will recognize if I can figure out where I put it. So there's progress on my bezels less ordinary workshop project that you guys challenged me. Those of you that were in that class challenged me to do, which is I've been finishing up the chain and clasp and so on for this piece. So
Oh,
that's
cool.
going to be done
Oh, good.
shortly.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
And that's got a couple of little sapphires set in the ends of the clasp. So that's just tube set clasp sapphires. It's going to have a sapphire put back from, this was the trauma that I caused when I forgot that I had a set sapphire and I quenched my piece. So the sapphire shattered. So we're going to be swapping
Ooh.
that one in. And then
Ooh.
finally, having been done with shows, I'm getting back to my big hollow form statement necklace.
Oh,
which
wow.
is going to be
Nice.
hinged all the way
Oh, now
through.
that's really cool.
And it's mokumegane and fine silver. So the fine silver components are going to get some kambu, I think. And I'm working right now on building out.
Gosh, Rachel, this sure beats my 4mm tube sets.
This is
Oh my
my
gosh.
it's winter and now I get to finish all
And
the
my
projects
dyed
that have been sitting on my
drusies.
bench. And I'm working on a hollow form mokame clasp, box clasp. That'll be the back point of this. So
Wow.
Great.
this piece has about 8 hours, maybe 10 hours at this point in hinges alone. So
Oh, wow.
I'm taking it a bit at a
Gorgeous.
time. But It's, yeah, about once a year or once every 2 years, I need to go through my pile of projects that have not been completed. Or the time limit is either a year or two, or I have to be at 50 projects awaiting completion. And then I have to go through and clear them out. And I'm not quite at 50, but I've certainly got a fair number that are out there. I'm just trying to get some things done that I can get photographed for next year's show season before I go back into the everyday stuff. So,
Mhm.
well, gang,
and Ray,
go ahead.
who,
Go ahead,
me?
Betsy. Yep.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to make a comment. I put in the chat something about the snap-on discs.
Yes.
And Guess Wine has extra fine. But I forgot to put in there the purple ones. If you call them,
Okay.
ask them about the purple ones.
Cool.
You know, I don't know what grit they are though. Nobody puts in the grit. So.
Yeah, but if they call them extra fine, that's better than any of the other Moors I've seen, because the Moors ones, I think I've only found in that 110, 220 range.
Right, they usually have coarse, medium, and yeah, of course in medium or something.
Yeah.
But okay. Anyway, that's it.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, because that very much is what I need. So they are flat discs and can't be turned upside down. Oh, the PSAs are not.
The PSAs, yes, Rio has those.
Got it. Okay, thank you for that.
Mhm.
Any other thoughts before we wrap for the session, gang?
Do you know what is our next date?
Oh, good question. So did anybody strongly object to me continuing and doing a session on the 21st? Is that going to
Not
devastate
me.
anyone? Okay, then
No.
then our next session will be the 21st. Normal schedule. We will finish the emerald basket frame, and we may be able to do the cut card setting for cabochon. I warn you ahead of time, that's a metric ton of measuring and sawing, and not a heck of a lot else. There's a tiny little bit of soldering at the very end. But when you want to talk about precision, when you're trying to slot two things together, that is the critical step, is exact mirror image. If you are planning to play along at home on that one, I urge you, even though John has lovely pictures of, I think it may even be an emerald cut in his selection of ones he's done, don't start there. Start with a basic round cabochon with a good curvature to it. Don't even start with, like I did on that one that I showed you guys, don't even start with an upright like that. You want simple for your first one of these. This setting for faceted is much harder to get fitted well than it is for a cabochon, but it looks equally cool on each of them. They're like, the variations on this one are kind of amazing. And it's really satisfying to get a good card cut. It's like the ones, you know, your first couple, you're going to get wonky fits potentially, but when you get one that actually is parallel, it's really lovely. This was exciting to me to get this done. So that'll be next session. And then we only have 2 more settings after this, 2 more settings to build in chapter 4, which is super cool. That is the multi-setting jig that I showed you, the weird little contraption. And that's another one that I'm going to give you a modification I ended up using over the way that John does it, because man, getting the prong positions right was a pain in the butt. So I'll show you how I set up one of those jigs, and then we'll make a batch of those. And we will do the square stock, which depending on timing, we may decide to do square stock next time and do cut card in January. And then we're moving on finally to chapter 4, which only has a few settings in it. All the rest of these chapters only have a few settings left. And as we get towards the end, I'll be asking you guys to give me a list of any settings you'd like to see me do again on camera. I'm going to have sessions to work over some of the ones that I really feel I didn't do well on at all, like the emerald cut step bezel. But if there's any specific one that you guys want to see more detail on, or see with a different variation, like I did a cab and you want to see a faceted or whatever, let me know. And we'll keep chugging into the next year. So
Yeah. I think I'm gonna do my homework with what you did today,
good, good.
because that looked like it was hard. Like the measuring, you got it right, but it was extra. So I'm gonna have a lot of patience.
Yeah, it's going to be a long time before I ever try one of these in gold, is what I can tell you. Possibly never. I'm just not that into emerald cuts, and this might be the reason. But I
I
gotta
may
say,
just
I do-
admire them.
yeah, I think they're lovely stones when somebody else sets them.
That's right.
And frankly,
I
one of my
haven't.
favorite unusual settings, it's not in John's book, is using heavy gauge tubing as prongs and setting diamonds in the corners that you're holding. Like, that's just gorgeous to me.
Yeah.
So I may play around with that at some point, not with diamonds probably, but I may play around with that kind of a setting for my own sake once I'm done with the book.
Lindsay's got some diamonds, so you know.
I may throw them at you.
So there we go, gang. This was, we made some progress on some of our settings, and we set a stone again, which is nice, so it can go on the board. And I'll see you in a couple weeks. I hope your holiday prep is not fraught with too many shoppers and not enough parking.
Mm,
Thanks,
Thank you so
Rachel.
much,
Thank
Rachel.
you.
Bye all.
Fun class. Thank you.
All right.
See you
bye.